Hello, everybody. Today we'll have another episode of Embodying the Logos. My guest is Corey, and he has a question about systems that he wants to circumambulate. So, yeah, Corey, what do you think systems are, and why do you want to explore those?
Well, I'll give you some background. I quite often encounter people that say the system's broken, right? Or they say, Mark kind of and Mark did a video on this too that I asked at a request for Mark of navigating patterns. And so, what do people mean when they say the system? Is it just is because does that even make sense? Is it just a whole series of like smaller interlaced network individual systems? Like you can't have, can you even have an overarching system that can be broken? So, the more I thought about it, I thought, what do they mean when they say the system's broken? And I thought, like, okay, what even is a system, right? So, yeah. So it's very. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I don't really know what people. I don't think people even know what they mean when they say that.
Mm-hmm.
And Mark was saying that people are just trying to get agency and kind of bring some intelligibility to complex phenomena.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not what he said. That's my take on it.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, you can think of a framework, right, which is it's like the skeleton of a building that holds it up, right? So then because there's load bearing things, then the way that you can make the rooms in the building is limited, right? Like there's only
Mm-hmm.
certain configurations that you can have, right? So but it is also allowing you to build up, right? Like without the framework, you can't go up in the sky because it needs to be hauled up, right? So I think if you have a spiritual uh, thing like that, right? Like there's this set of constraints or the set of rules or the set of natural laws, right? That people participate in, and they allow people to build, like they allow people to build complexity past the natural, and uh, this complexity past the natural is allowing us a bunch of things, right? Like a system allows you to outsource your cognition. It allows you to outsource your relationship with people, right? Like in some sense, you can just say, "Oh, I'm handing you this paper, and you know what to do," because we
Mm.
organized our relationship, and I don't have to know who's in front of me. I don't have to be able to communicate with a person as long as I know this language of the system. I can have a transactional or yeah or more an impersonal relationship with you, right? Like I don't relate to you as a person. I relate to you as a cog in the machine that fulfills a certain function, right?
Now that's
And
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Continue. Uh, no, so there's one thing that I got stuck at. You were saying beyond the natural, which I had trouble with, but then I cut you off before you were really getting going, so I apologize for that. Cog in the machine. So quite often people are like, "Oh, you're just a cog in the machine, man," or something to that effect, which was kind of like the move that Mark made in the voice that I didn't like. But like, it's interesting because some people, I like what you said about the rooms, right, and constraints. Because some people don't, they want ultimate freedom, but they don't realize that they need the walls and they need the roof and they need the floors in order to act with agency, right? They think that they can just like eliminate the pillars of the foundation of the system and then they'll be able to function in a pure utopia or something.
Right, and you can live in a hut, right? And you can even live outdoors, but that's a trade-off. Like so now you can do certain things, right? You get more freedom in certain ways, but now nature's gonna kick your ass, right? Like you're not gonna be able to flush your toilet. Like what are you gonna do with your trash? You need to dig a hole or whatever, or like go bring it somewhere else. Like if someone has malintent, right? Like where's the society that will put the policeman in front of your door, like the people that will stand behind you to cover your ass, right? Like so there's different levels, and in Plato's Republic, he talks about this, right? Like there's different levels where you can have the city, right? So you have a city that's basically living with nature, right? With a little bit of adaptation, like homes and agriculture, right? And then you have a complex system, right, where you have specialization, right? And the specialization allows you to have affluence, right? And then if you want more luxury, right, like things that you don't necessarily need, or that aren't that, like, they're not contributing to living, they're contributing to the quality of living instead. All right. Um, then you generate things of value, right? And then he says, well, like, people are going to want to steal it from you, so you need an army to protect it, right? And you need to have trade, and trade brings in other things, right? So now you have to protect from the other things, like other cultures, right? Because, like, you're gonna have to maintain your culture, else you can't do the things that you want to do, right? And so there's these trade-offs, and yeah, people are not fully recognizing what that means, and how to do those.
Yeah, that's really good. I had a thought and I lost my train of thought. I got distracted for a second. Yeah, so in a sense, when people say the system's broken, what they're really saying is they want to overcome the constraints of the system. They feel that the system is holding them back somehow. But you know what I mean? Like, yeah. And ironically enough, when you have like alternatives to the system, new systems will emerge, right?
Yeah.
And what the other thing I was thinking about is how do networks play into systems, right? Like you could have different systems network together, or is a system a series of networks of I want to say nodes, but like I'm trying to like there's something that's in my mind that I'm not able to articulate.
Yeah, so you could say that a network is a higher level system, right?
Mm.
So you could say a city is a system, right? But you can have a trade network between the cities, right? So
Yeah.
now there's a system that has a production, and they can outsource the cutting of the trees, and making the wooden shoes happen somewhere else, and then selling the wooden shoes happen somewhere else again, right? And so we get these really complex uh, dependencies, right? And economies that are these systems that are interrelated, right? And you can say, well, like, a neighborhood is a system, right? Like, a neighborhood is a system that's not self-sufficient, right? Because it's
Yes.
dependent
Yes.
upon the city, right? But it is a system, right? Like, there is a self-sufficiency on some level, right? Like, because we identify it as a unity, right? So like, the neighborhood probably has self-determination in some sense, right? Like, we want to have this road be this way or whatever, right? Like, we want to have more police or less police. We want to have these rules, building rules, right? Like, because we want to have this. We want to host this spirit, right? Like, and the spirit needs a container, and we're going to cultivate this container, right? Like, we're going to care for it, and
So,
and so
yeah.
now, like, if that can happen in, yeah, go ahead.
No, I just had a question. Like, okay, I didn't want you to get too far ahead of me because I have trouble keeping up. So when you mentioned the container, that was really interesting. So what do you mean with the container in relationship to systems?
Right. So you have the broken windows theory, right? Which
Ah,
effectively says, right, like, if you don't take care of something, then people are not gonna feel like they need to uphold a certain quality of existence, right? Like, and more things are allowed, right? So in shaping the environment, you you have you send a message, right? Like, so if you have this Russian concrete buildings, right, like, that are all in Eastern Europe, right? Like, there's this sense of efficiency, right, but also a deadness, right? Like, it creates an atmosphere, right? And people are gonna live out that atmosphere, right? And and when you have all these postmodern buildings, right, like, that don't they don't commune, right? Like there's no central coherence, right? Like then there's this attention grabbing environment, right? But there's no peace, right? Like there's no unity, there's no being, right? And now you have other ways of organizing your neighborhoods, right? And all of these things, they present you with like, do I want to build a pub here, right? Like like I might not want to build a pub under this concrete flat, right? Because like that's not the neighborhood and the people that I want to attract, right? So yeah, that's what I'm talking about with cultivating the spirit, right? Like, are you are you are you the place that the person wants to have their business, right? Like, is this a place that people feel attracted to?
So I was thinking of something. I work at a hospital, right? And as I was on refuse one day, and I was picking up all the garbage in the building, so I got to go get all the garbage, see all the different parts of the building, right? And seeing how like each part had like you have to have morgue, you have to have a kitchen, you have to have like all these things. I thought, wow, who designed this and how did they design it? And I thought our systems. I think sometimes when people talk about the system is broken or they're against the system, I think they honestly think that there's one person designing it all, or that or maybe they think that they could collectively design it or something. But everyone's equal and everyone has the same skills, and everyone has the same job. But that doesn't make sense. You need kind of hierarchies and different skills. But the thing that I'm wondering is, are systems emergent? Like, is a hospital created, or is it like kind of almost an emergent phenomenon that's almost beyond the architect, right? Because the architect will design the hospital, but in the end, that hospital is going to have to be jerry rigged. I mean, the workers, like I've heard workers say, "Oh yeah, you can design this on paper, but we got to build it." So like, there's, at each level, there's going to be corporations, right? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we were talking about the four causes earlier, and I think this might be a point to bring that in, actually. So yeah, you have the final cause, right? Like the telos, the purpose, and it's like, okay, what do I want to do with a hospital? Well, I want to house a bunch of people, right? And I want to have staff that can reach the people in this amount of time, right? Like, okay, so now you're getting a bunch of constraints, right, on what you want to design, because you can't have all the people that need to facilitate the patients on one side of the building and have the patients on the other side, right? Because
and
that's
then you got to have food for them. You got to have like scrubs for the nurses if they need it, or the doctors. You got to have like food for the doctors to eat. You got to have like the cleaning staff. You got the cooking staff, to make the meals. You got to have the lab to like it's amazing though how it all fits together, right? And when I thought of it as similar to a ship, right? Like I worked on the ships, and like it too was like a self-contained system. So the hospital in many ways is self-contained, but it's still like intricate and interrelated. But I was like, yeah. So, going back to the question, yeah, let's discuss the thing of emergence a little further.
yeah. So yeah, maybe a ship is easier, right? Because like a ship is more constrained by itself, right? Because it has limited amount of space, right?
And there's also knowing like people are there's only inputs and outputs when you're at port. Other than that, it is completely self-contained.
Right. And then at first, like there was rowing ships, right? So now you need to facilitate the motor of the ship, which is oars, and like they need to be on the side, right? And then people need benches for the oars, right? So then what you can do with the rest of the ship is really limited, right? And then you get sails, right? Like now you can make bigger ships, and so and now what are you gonna do, right? When you make a bigger ship, are you gonna make a room for the captain, or are you gonna make a kitchen, or are you gonna make a shelter for sleep? Like you gotta make a decision, right? Like, and I bet all of those decisions were made, right? Like those actually existed, right? And then there is an evolutionary aspect to this,
Yeah, I
right?
was
Like,
gonna say that. Yes, yes, 100%.
so but it's not 100%, right? So I watch these Chinese shows lately, and then they have these ships, and they literally have kind of like a house upon the ship, right? Like, and and the way that they go about their things is with pushing sticks in the lake, right? Like there's a way that where their motor isn't in the oars, but there's in the pushing, right? And so then everything changes, right? Like it's important for them to stand, right? Well,
Mhm.
like if you're having oars, right? Like if you all these rowboats, like you know what happens when you stand on those, right? You go like, "Ooh." So but that's not a system, right? Like that's just bare necessities. Or you can go back to the analogy of the city, right? It's like, well, but now we can make bigger ships, right? Like so it's like let's do a steamship, right? Like so now we need to have this place where there's fire, right? Like we need to put that in relationship to the trust, right? We need to transfer the energy to the what's it called, whatever, like to the water, right? And and then it's like, well, where do we sleep, and where do we have the kitchen, right? Like these things, like what do we do with the heat of the steam engine, right? Like um and then you get bigger and bigger ships, right? And you can see the arms race, right? Like so there's an arms race in weapons, and 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 then there's also an arms race in the size of ships, and then you get to the cruise ships, right? Like the Titanic or whatever. And like the Titanic, they made the decisions with these walled areas, right? So they were privileging not sinking the whole ship, but just a part of the ship, right? Like they so there's this trade-off, but now that ship is so big, right? Now they have this ballroom. They have they have to put the ballroom in relationship to the dinner tables, right? And so now there's different decision, right? Like the decision isn't about efficiency anymore, right? Like now there's an elegance aspect, like there's a luxury aspect that is privileging how things get organized. And I think we're living in the age of affluence now, right? So it's like, oh yes, we can do almost everything on the luxury basis, right? Like that is an option that we have. Like it's not efficient, but like it's possible. And I think that's where everybody gets this impression, like, oh yeah, we can just do that because like we're doing it.
Yeah, yeah. Not realizing, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. Yeah, it's interesting. Like when I work on the ships, also like using that as maybe, and it's very similar to a hospital in a sense, right? Like, you have like security, you have crew, and you have staff work in the gift shop, the casino, the musicians or whatever, and they have certain privileges. Then you have the officers. The officers have certain privileges, and they're in certain areas. And you have the crew who also live in a different area. Like, and then you have all these different components. You have a trash area, you have a kitchen, you have a galley, you have and then you have the dining room, and in order to have all these things, you're going to have different people trained different ways. So a system is not only the mechanical aspects of, say, the hospital or a ship, but also the training that goes into all the people that compromise it. And then that elaborates through a network into another system. Where do you get these people? Where do you get the nurse for the ship? Where do you get the casino dealers that's trained for the ship? Where do you get the musician from the ship, right?
Yeah, now you need a schooling system, right? Because like people need to have certain basic skills to become cooks or cleaning people or whatever, right? Like there's this basis, right? And now there's this whole organizational structure because someone once decided that we should have these types of ships, right? Effectively. But not only that, right? Because like the schooling system is designed that you can specialize in many different ways. Well, like design is a big word, but the purpose of it is to afford that specialization.
So now there's something that comes into play, like okay, so like a lot of people that are, say, they're against the system is broken. What we need to do is replace a hierarchical system with a kind of collectively distributed system, or a sense where everyone's on the equal playing field. But that kind of eliminates specialization. I don't think that'll work because there's almost a resentment against people that have certain skills, not realizing that those people too are constrained. The captain is constrained in many ways, and he doesn't know everything, right? Like he doesn't have supreme power over the ship. Like, for instance, I was surprised to know that on a ship, the captain, like we were going into New Orleans, and when you went into New Orleans, they had to get a pilot to come on that knew the Mississippi well enough to guide the ship into the thing. You know what? So like the captain was insufficient in many ways. But then people could say, "Oh, we got to overthrow the captain and take the ships for the common man," because you had staff and you had crew, and the crew were less than the staff. The crew were mostly cleaning people, the working class, kind of usually they were from like third world countries or whatever, whereas the staff were from first world countries, right? And you almost sense, and I did in a sense feel a sense of injustice in that. I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but where is I going with that, Manuel? Draw some.
Well, yeah, you're trying to relate the hierarchy to the system and to the essentiality of the role, right? So there's an element where yes, you the captain doesn't know what the mechanic does, right? Like
Yeah.
there's too much specialization. And in the Roman system, it was pretty cool. At least the ideal was that you would go up through the ranks of the army, right? So you'd serve in every post of the army, and then you'd become a consul, or whatever, right? So you'd earn your way up. And we kind of got rid of this, right? Which in some sense is good, that it allows a less of a pathway, right? And like becoming a consul, right? Like a lot of people didn't make it. Let's just say that, right? So there is an element where it's also like, yeah, like it is less easy to go up the hierarchy because it's not the normal path, right? Like if you're scrubbing decks, that doesn't mean that you can be a mechanic, right? Like um, and there's a reason for that, because you need to study a long time to be a mechanic, right? And then if you're a mechanic, that doesn't mean that you can be a captain, right? Like a captain requires you to have a different skill set, and like not everybody has that skill set. And yeah, then the question is, well, like how much does the captain need to know about the mechanic's job?
So
And
if you
like,
talk about like the people that you hear talking about like the system's broken, we need to fix the system, we need to replace the system. And then I mean revolution comes to mind in this, like communist revolution or anarchist revolutions come to mind. And I mean thinking like the problems with that, right? They don't realize how easily that if the system breaks, the foundation, the pillar of that building or that system, when that falls down, they think they will be freer, but they won't. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, or temporarily, right? Until
until
someone
winter
comes knocking
comes,
at their door
or until someone comes knocking on the door. Exactly. Like
with
you
a new
remember the
system.
like when they had like defund the police or whatever, right?
Yeah. If
Yeah.
someone comes knocking at your door with a new system, like that will happen, right? Like, and 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 there's kind of like an evolution to systems, right? So you have mafia type of situations, right, where
That's
there's
a
like, hmm?
That's a perfect example. So there you have like some people decide they're going to break free from the system. So then they go into crime, say, and try to make it for themselves. And then very soon in that world, they realize that they need to band together with other people. And then there's going to have to be some kind of structure. Even in, say, like something as simple as like a drug dealer or whatever, right? There is a system that of hierarchy that emerge out of that system. You know what I mean? Like out of a system of like and you use the mafia, which was a great example, which would be the evolution of a criminal system, right?
Right, yes, right. So indeed, what you hit the nail on the head, right? Like there is a point in which it's like we got to give back to the community, right? Because like they're supporting us, like we need their support, right? Like there's a different force like the police or whatever that we need to protect ourselves against, right? So now you gotta you got this responsibility trusted upon you, right? And this is what people don't realize. Yeah, like power, great power comes with great responsibility. And then the question is like, well, what does that mean, right? Like it as a head of a mafia family, that's a little bit more straightforward than as a president, right? Because like if you're on at the head of America, for example, right, like 3 million more plus people, then what you need to do for that group isn't obvious, right? Like it's not like the direct uh, feedback of life is saying, well, no, you need to react to this, you need to react to this, right? Like that is happening, right? But going to the moon isn't a reaction something on the ground, right? Like that's stating, no, like I want to be like this. I have this ideal. I want to manifest this ideal, and we're going to unite around this ideal. And there's a problem between this emergent quality and this emanating quality, right? So there's this emergence, and then something exists, right? Like there's a bunch of people, right? Like he does all the dirty jobs, right? The killing. That guy does the shipping. That guy does the accounting, right? But then it's like you grow bigger, right? And there's a hierarchy in the accounting, and there's a hierarchy in the shipping, and the killing can't be done like this because there needs to be protection on like 15 different places, right? And now you need to these complex structures, right? Like you need to, like, how are we getting all these people to do this, right? Like there needs to be an actual organization, and yeah, like at that point, you need to start making decisions, right? Like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. This is what we want to achieve, and that's where the emanation comes in.
So I don't know if I want to touch on this yet, but there's almost like a theological principle or metaphysical principle too, in the sense, right? Like, so like it's funny too. Many of the people that say that they don't want a system are also opposed to, like, they think that religion or ideologies in control of the system, the wrong religion or the wrong ideology, right? So you mentioned something about ideals, right? So like, does any given system has to be organized around a central principle? Like, let's, you know what I mean? Like, so let's say the mafia, what would the central, I mean, they would have obviously the goal of making money, right? But there's
Mm-hmm.
also things like respect and loyalty, or also like, trying to use another example.
Well, you can have people organized around a person that is embodying certain principles, right?
Hmm.
So that's really effective, right? But it's not lasting, right? Like if that person gets removed, then you have a problem, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so if you point at the principles as opposed to the person, then you can persist past the removal of this individual. And
No.
that's a project that they did in ancient China, right? Like they were like, what are the principles that we can follow? And even in the ancient Greece, right? Like what are the principles that we can follow so that we can persist and have good society?
So, which is interesting because this brings the thing that Peterson and people touch on is having to, like, okay, like, Peter, did you see the video? There's Peterson was talking about the Queen, right? And he was talking about, um he's kind of relating, he kind of compared the English system to the American system, right? In the American system, you can have a personality like Trump. He's at the top of the hierarchy. There's no one to constrain him. In the European, in the Commonwealth constitutional, uh, what is it? Constitutional monarchy? I don't know what it is. I should know. It's my freaking country. Use Canada, but yeah, you have the Queen, the Queen who embodies the god or whatever, like, you know what I mean, like, so like you have the person that's in control of the company, but also they aren't the top of the hierarchy, neither is the queen. There's something that Peterson said about that organization that made me really take heed and go, oh, that's really interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it related to almost the metaphysical situation, right? Now I know that the states they say, you know, they have God is mentioned or somehow, I don't know, I'm not able to articulate myself, but maybe you can take a run from with my steam stream of consciousness, Manuel.
So yeah, like I think this idea, right? Like Louis XIV, I think, said, "L'État c'est moi," right? I am the state. So there's a thing where if you have a strong personality, and then everything starts revolving around you, right? Like so one of the things that in France during that time was really happening was that they set the fashions, right? And not only for France, but for the whole of Europe, right? Like,
Oh,
and there's this thing, right, where there's this aura that you build up, and but what is it, right? Like this king is in some sense representing the divine principle, right? And then at a certain point, the the parliaments, right, like the representatives of the people, they started getting more and more voice, right? Like they started organizing, right? There were some scuffles in England. They even killed the king, right? But then they reinstated the king because they were like, yeah, we can't go without the king, right? We still need to unify behind the king. And so there's
Hashtag reign of terror.
yeah, and so there's the struggle, right? Like what is the appropriate place for the king? What's the appropriate place for
Mm.
and I think at a certain point the king receded in as a ruler and was more cast into the representative role, right? Like in some sense representative of the people, but more so representative of the nation, right? Like so if
Mm.
you see what's happening now, for example, I know the Dutch royal house, right? Like they're traveling, right? They're going to other countries. They meet with their royal families, right? They're having negotiations for cooperation, right? Like so they're increasing the quality of the integration of the nation within the other nations, and I think that is a valid ceremonial role, right? And also within the nation, right? Like there's certain national holidays where they're fulfilling ceremonial functions, right? So there is this, uh, I guess, somewhat representing the divine that the royalty still has in Europe.
So I remember what I said. You're talking about Trump, right? Like Trump doesn't have anyone that can really call him out on shit, when he was in power, or the president in
Well,
general.
that was the role of the media, but yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And then I remember them talking about how the Queen, um, God rest her soul, um, the Queen, under so many prime ministers, and she could kind of like, she was in a role where she could tell him. Ironically enough, who was it in the past? The jester. Anyways, who knows what the clown is? But that's an entirely different random thought association. But yeah, so the queen could talk to the prime minister and give him a say. Now she didn't wield any actual constitutional power to enact laws or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't remember exactly what he said, but sure someone out there put it in the comments if you find out where that video is with Peterson talking about that.
Yeah, like I don't know if they changed it, but the Dutch king actually had to approve every law.
Oh, okay.
He had to sign
Actually, in
every law
in
in the
Canada,
house.
we have a thing called the Governor General, and like a lot of people want to remove the Governor General. So if we make any changes to our Constitution, we have to get it rubber stamped by the Queen or King of England, or sorry, the UK or whatever of the Commonwealth.
Yeah, see, so there is something there, right? And it's like, yeah, like, and I think it's appropriate, right? Because it's like you don't get involved in the nitty gritty affairs, right? But there is certain things that there should be a check and balance upon what this group of representatives is doing, right? Like, and changing a constitution is one of these things that is like a monumental thing. And if you're part of something bigger, right? Like you should get approval of the something bigger for the monumental thing. Like I fully agree.
Now, I was thinking you said something about ideals too, and I thought like in places that I really wish I knew what the word was. Well, it sounds like you have a similar political system as I, where it's like a democracy, but you also have a constitutional monarchy. Is that the word? Anyways, doesn't matter. Maybe someone in the comments can put that in. But also the king or queen kind of embodying, representing the nation, but also embodying almost like the highest hierarchy. I was thinking of the ultimate system that we can't comprehend would almost venture on not only philosophical or ideological frame, but on a metaphysical, spiritual frame, right? Like God save the queen, right? Or king.
Yeah, right. Like so there's a bunch of hierarchies that coexist, right? So like the political hierarchy always exists, right? Like you always need to organize the polis, the people, right? And then parallel to that, you often have the military hierarchy, right? And you can see the
Mm.
police as an extension of that in some sense, right? Although they want to decouple these. Um, and then there's in in the financial system, right? Like you can have a financial hierarchy, right? If you
Mm.
go to like socialists or communist uh, systems, right, where the money is being managed in such a way that it constrains the self-expression of people, and um, but you can have capitalism where that constraint isn't happening through the state, but then it's effectively happening through emergence, right? Like now there's someone who has a lot of money, and like Elon Musk, and he gets to decide to buy Twitter, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Hashtag Elon Musk.
so like now there's a bunch of reorganization happening there, and but yeah, like that has to happen, right? Like someone has to make the decisions, and yeah, since we can go back to what do these people want, right? Like people think they know what they want and what they need.
Well, the other thing I think is, well, maybe if we go rewind back to we were talking about it, what my question originally was, what is a system? And
Mhm.
when people say the system is broken, what do they mean? But also when they talk about a system, many people I don't think even understand that they're embedded in a whole series of systems. Their organs are in a system. Their body is a functioning system of smaller components that are interlinked and networked together, right? Like, you have the circulatory system, you have the respiratory system, et cetera, right? Um, where am I going with that? So I think a lot of times when people are just talking about the system, they're using they have this ill-defined thing that frightens them, and they're trying to conjure up some kind of like egregore that will make sense of the world, and then they will be able to feel that they have agency. Now, Mark kind of thought that when people are talking about the system, what they're really trying to do is find some sense of feeling of control or yeah, feeling of agency. I don't yeah. What do you think of that? Or maybe you care to elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, I think a good way to think about it is the hermeneutics of suspicion, right? So when
Yes.
when you're trying to understand something, where are you coming from, right? Like is the thing that you're perceiving an evil force because like you're frustrated in your life and you can't do what you want, or is the thing that you're seeing something that you can participate in, right? Um, so I've been thinking a lot about the word enjoyment, right? So N is with, right? And joy is what? Oh my! Now I'm going deep.
Go for it.
So joy is, I guess, a sense of participating in glory or something.
Mm.
Like it's seeing that things are right or something. Seeing that things are bearing fruit, and you and there's a way that you're participating in the creation of the fruit. I think that's what enjoy is, right? So you're and what is important about that is that you're doing it with something outside of you, right? You're in the thing and you're joining with it, and that has to be bigger than you, right? Like the thing outside of you is necessarily more than you, so it's bigger than you, right? So that can be scary, right? Viveki talks about awe and horror, right? Like you can
Yes, that's
just find
good.
something awesome. Oh my god, like I just was part of it, or it's like, oh my god, like all of this stuff, and like what is it doing to me, and like there's these two modalities that you can relate to that, and I think people don't. Yeah, they're projecting their frustration upon the system, right? Instead, they should find a way to find joy in the system, right? Like the system is composed of people, first of all, right? So what the system is doing is dependent on what they're doing, right? And so if you're part of the system, you can make it move slightly towards a a way of manifesting instead of another way of manifesting. So that's one thing. And then within your place in the system, you are communing with people, right? So even if the manifestation of the system is bad, your manifestation towards the people around you can be good. And that requires you to have a level of detachment in some sense from the identity of the whole system, right? Like, and we were talking about agency, right? Like, it's also like joy is maybe identifying with the thing that you did have agency with. Instead of presupposing why you have agency, you're finding out like, oh no, my agency manifested it, right? Like, so instead of having this arrogant position, like I know what is going to be happening, you're like, this just happened and I get to be a part of it.
So now when we talk about the system, or many people that are against the system, that feel the system is broke, feel that the system is oppressive, sometimes I think, and then they come up with conspiracy theories. And I came up with the idea that the thing that would absolutely terrify them is for them to accept how emergent all these systems are. Because it's much, even though they would feel oppressed, they'd much rather feel that they're oppressed by Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk than believe that no one's completely in control. Because that terrifies them. The belief that there is not one central thing in control, and that's because they don't have a hierarchy, and they don't have the hierarchy of a metaphysical notion, right? A metaphysical sense of order, right? Which would relate to almost materialism, and also relate to like certain like metaphysical or theological positions of doubt.
Yeah, and why do you think they want to have this evil being at the top to be upset about?
Because in an ironic sense, it's almost more relieving that at least someone's in control. You know what I mean? Because if you can't have God at the top of the hierarchy, or some organizing principle of the universe, whatever you want to call it, higher power or whatever, if you don't have anything, then that's terrifying because then everything's meaningless, random, and chaotic.
Well, yeah, or you have to take responsibility for the
Uh,
things around
yeah, that's good point. Excellent point.
you,
Yeah.
right? Because not everything is chaotic, right? Like I I organize my house in a certain way. Do I take sufficient responsibility for organizing my house? Probably not, right? Um, should I do that? Well, maybe not. Maybe I get a wife and she can do that, right? Because she's probably better at it than I am. Because if I was better, I would have done it. and but 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 what did I just say? Well, the way that I express in the world would be better if I was part of this small system, like the set
Yeah,
system
that's good.
of participating in a role where you're not you're not having the same skills, right? You're not having the same contribution, so you're not equal, right? Like you're not you're contributing. It's different things, but you're contributing to the same project, and the project wouldn't exist without either of you, right? So you're both necessary but not equal.
Yeah, I mean, and people come frustrated with systems all the time. I mean, I've heard a number of times people go they're frustrated with like our democratic or capitalistic systems, and they think, well, maybe it would be good. Maybe if we had a good dictator, it would be all right. You know what I mean? Maybe because then we could at least finally get something done.
Yeah,
And I don't know.
dictators are awesome.
What's that?
And good dictators are awesome. Like, yes.
Yeah, but does that? Yeah, yeah, great.
No,
Yeah.
but like, oh, someone who's actually knows what to do and has power, great, right? Like that's amazing. Um, but the problem is, right, like that
What happens in a
only lasts
generation
one
with the next
gen. Yeah,
generation?
exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And it's utopia. It's utopia, right? And for some reason, like for instance, like we were talking about the French Revolution earlier, right? And they thought the divine right? Of who was it? Was it Robospare that ended up leading the reign of terror? I mean, he ended up becoming like worse than the king ever was, right? I mean, millions of people were executed, right, in the name of liberty and freedom. And
Yeah, well, that happens, right? Like if you want to take control, uh, people are not going to move with you, right? Like you can see it in yourself, right? If you want to change something in your life, you're not going to move with yourself. Like you need so much prodding and poking. And it's like, yeah, like it's really hard to change something that is, and like then people are going to fall off the boat.
and in a sense, our culture values so much individuality, and I myself prided upon that. And like, I'm an individual, and you see it even in cultural things. Ironically, they're not like I go to punk shows occasionally, and it's like, look at all these individuals. They're all wearing jean jackets with patches, and like it couldn't be more of a uniform.
Yes, the uniform of rebellion. Yes.
And this isn't necessarily related, but like when you think the system is broken, then you use the term revolution in the sense of it being a circle that goes around. The thing is, when people think revolution, they think that it's going to stop on the utopia,
Well, yeah,
but it's not.
or just their lives, right? Like
Ha 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 ha.
I'll have it good during my life, or I have it good and then I'll move to another country, right? Or like whatever. Like,
Yeah.
but it's hard, right? Like it's hard to think far into the future, right? It's in a sense what's happening is really childish, right? Like I want this, make this happen, right? It's like yes, you want this, maybe we can make it happen somewhat, but there's a trade-off, right? And it's not only a trade-off between all the buckets that we have right now, right? It's a trade-off between all the buckets that we have not right now and all the buckets that we could have.
It, one thing I'll jump around a little bit. One thing that's interesting too is the I don't know what the word is, anonymity or just like thinking that Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos are horrible. But when you think about the intricate systems that they develop, like think about Amazon. Like if you think about how amazing that system is, and they're like, oh well, they should just play their employees more. But that system has enabled a whole like they don't produce anything. They're just a distribution network that's allowing millions of people to produce things and sell them online, right? Like that's an amazing, complicated system, right? And then they think that, oh well, if these people at the top of these various corporate hierarchies just like they want to flatten those hierarchies, but they don't realize that those hierarchies would not exist if those hierarchies were flattened, right?
Yeah, so I would argue that you wanna take a spiritual frame for this, right? So it's like what are they doing, right? Like so there's this one person at the top, right? Which is literally like this king, right? Like they emerged, right? Like they're the shining star that people started following. And and so in their wake, right, they drag along people, right? Like they have a spirit, they manifest the spirit, and they drag along people, and these people, right, like they don't start becoming nodes of the hierarchy, right? And so there's an emergence within the emanation, right, where it's like okay, we're building a bunch of ships, right? And then the ships is at sea, and we're like, well, kind of putting the kitchen like on the side of the ship doesn't work because the fire
Mhm.
goes out, right? Like so we shouldn't be doing that, right? And so then there's these smaller subunits, these containers, right? Like so it's like a distribution center, for example, right? Like I want to manifest this, right? Like I want to manifest this building, and this building has this certain needs, right? And like I need these types of people to cooperate with me, right? So you kind of get like a schema, right, or whatever, right? And you have to fit it in the local, right? Like there's the like there's a place where you can't build into the ground because there's only rock, for example, right? So now you can't build the same distribution center, right? So there's you need to adjust to the local building requirements, but you still want to fulfill the same function, right? And so there's I guess I'm talking about this interaction between the constraints of reality, right? The skills of the people, and the idea, right? Like how things should work, right? And then you get a new instantiation, right? Like you get a new baby version of your formula, right? And now that baby relates with the world, right? Now you get lessons that can feed back up the hierarchy, and we can give that information back to all of the nodes in our network, right? That to update, right? So there's these data communications at different time scales and in different domains, right? Because they also have the internet part, right? And there's all of this interface that kind of emerges, right? But at a certain point, someone says things have to emerge in this way because that's how we gather information. And
So Ayn Rand had an interesting thing, like say, use and talk about Thomas Edison. The same thing could have been said of Thomas Edison in his time. This could be said about Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, right? Like so that person ends up making a lot of money off their profit. But how much wealth did they contribute to society? Like how much enormous wealth has the automobile or the car contributed to millions of people having jobs, making cars, millions of people being able to work at night? Like that can even be calculated, really, right? Like, rising tide raises all ships or something. Is that the saying?
yeah, yeah, but like I said, right? Like when you're doing one thing, you're not doing another thing.
And the other thing too, when people talk about systems, they're trying to talk at like such a high frame that it's like it doesn't even make sense anymore. You know what I mean? Like the system, as if there's some overarching commonality. I mean, maybe there is, but once you get into
Well, that's
that
what
thing,
they
you're
want to
talking about.
make politics, right? Like that's the, like that. Why is everybody so upset about Ukraine, right? Like there's wars all over, right? But this one is special, right? And the reason that it's special is because there's this thing, right? The system, and the system is manifesting in a certain way, and we all think like, oh yeah, there's this control, and now it's frustrated. Like the system is frustrated, right? It's like, yeah, Russia isn't keeping international law, and therefore we need to invest obscene amounts of money in Ukraine, right? Like, so there's this sense that there's there's something that we need to protect, right? Like there's this story that we all believe in, and if Russia proves to the world that the story is just a story, then the story doesn't work anymore.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So the entire thing with Russia and stuff is interesting too, because again, so the questions that I'm pondering, and we'll table some of this for another talk, but like the relationship of networks to systems, right? So what we're seeing now is the international system that has been based on globalization starting to change, almost a deglobalization since COVID happened, as a result of numerous interconnected systems. You realize how interconnected. All of a sudden, we're like, holy shit, we're dependent upon these nodes. And if something like COVID or disease happens, all of a sudden these nodes fall apart at key points of infrastructure, and we can no longer build fucking cell phones soon. Like now all of a sudden the United States is having to restore most of their electronics, right? Or let's say China has, like, God forbid, if this were to happen hypothetically, a dictatorial leader took control, and had control of key infrastructure of like the world's technological, you know, like to produce chips or whatever, what would happen, right? So you're having like a series of interconnected. I think the Russian thing too, like you have this series of interconnected network systems, and then people are trying to understand that, and then it's so complicated. You're talking about economic systems, you're talking about political systems, you're talking about ideological systems, and then you're talking about the numerous systems that are just people, like relating to their own individual lives, their nationalities, their personal religious beliefs, their sense of identity. And all that is just so complicated, just so much easier to believe that somewhere is a dark Sith-like, shadow-like cabal controlling all of it.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of what you're talking about, right? Like, for example, COVID or the war, right? Like, so in Ukraine, there was a bunch of people, and they thought of themselves a certain way, and then the invasion happened, and then the way that they think about themselves completely changed, right? Like, COVID happens, right? Like, nations re-articulate what they think is important, right? Like, there's there is this latent spirit, right? Because not every nation is reacting the same way to COVID, right? But but they're manifesting a spirit of the country in their reaction, right? But they're also identifying against this COVID thing, right? Like, in some ways necessarily, right? And in other ways they too much, right? Like this, there was a sense in which not enough was done, and there was a sense in which too much was done. And how do you figure that out in the moment? Well, that's almost impossible. Like, it's almost impossible, right? But you're required to, right? So, like, you had to go through something like that yourself, right? Like, at a certain point, you had to move, right? Like, who are you when you move? And then you get into
Yeah.
this identity crisis. And then how do you want to manifest? Who do you want to be?
Yeah, and I think ultimately too, like ironically enough, like we're talking about like you and Mark often and others and myself too talk about like the political frame, right? And then the philosophical frame, but really everything's kind of it's like all political and ideological frames could be put under philosophy, really, and even science could be put under philosophy. But then the higher frame is the metaphysical, right? So in a sense, on a personal level, where do you get your ability to exhibit agency in the world and deal with the meaning crisis that we often talk about, or deal with existential despair, or to deal with I guess in this situation, we're more talking about the anxiety, right? The anxiety of being involved in external circumstances that you have no control over, right? And then so that comes back to like, so are you going to assign agency that just makes you angry to like some shadow like Sith like cabal, or are you going to affirm the good, as you say, and not act against, and let go like God, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the word that I want to introduce to is here's surrender, right? Like, what are you surrendering to, right? Are you surrendering to COVID? Is COVID going to determine how you live now? Like, really?
Yeah,
Um,
you said that strikes something very interesting, Manuel. Like you talk about identifying against. Ironically, the people that are identifying against masks, against whatever the globalists trying to put in the evil COVID agenda, right? In a sense, those forces enacting against, they are submitting to those to COVID itself. Like maybe you could round out what I'm trying to say because I'm not able to articulate it.
well, yeah, right. So when you're doing something, right, you're you're doing something for a purpose, right? So are you are you relating to COVID because it's an inhibition towards you going to work, or are you relating to COVID because you're afraid of what COVID could do, right? If you're in the second group, that's not a good strategy. First of all, you don't know what COVID could do. You don't know how to relate to what COVID could do. Right? There's a couple things that are well, common sense wouldn't be the right word, but they're obvious, right? Like washing your hands when something happens, right? Where you could have been like not coughing in someone's face, right? Like these things are obvious, and then it starts getting more fuzzy and fuzzy after that, right? And I was like, yeah, like I want to get like 0.5% more out of this chance or whatever. It's like, yeah, okay, maybe, right? But like, do you know the side effects, right? Like, and at a certain point, you should not give in to the fear anymore, right? Like even if you can make progress, right? Like even if what you do actually is beneficial, right? Like it's taxing, right? It's taxing in the way that you're operating, but it's also taxing on your mental health. Like why? Well, you can't walk around worried all the time. Like then you get stressed and you get different diseases. Like okay, how's that bad?
Yeah, I was thinking too, like, okay, you talk about these people in Portland, like the riots, and you talk about like the Freedom Convoy and stuff, and like, some people getting so angry and frustrated. In a sense, they're resisting something, they're acting against something, but in a way, they're submitting to the anger and the fear that that thing is causing. So in a way, they are wanting freedom, but they're losing all their agency to these darker emotions.
Right. And I was listening to a show, a Dutch show earlier, and they were talking about Black Pete and how there was this wave of people actually coming from America, right? Were like implying that this is racist or that they felt discriminated against through this traditional feast, right? Dutch feast. And there was this whole drama around it, right? And actually the Dutch society adapted, right? And there's a couple of pocket of people who say like, no, like I want to have my tradition, and like you don't have a say in how I have my tradition. And then what do? Well, they go there and they go protest. And I'm like, why are you going to this town in the middle of whatever, bothering these people, right? About your ideology. And then these people, right, they're like, okay, you want to come here and attack us, right? You want to identify against us? Well, we'll identify against you, and we'll see who wins, right? And
Yeah.
that that that's the thing that will happen, right? Like if you're gonna keep calling me a racist, I'll be a racist. Like if you need me to be, I'll be one. Like because like
Yeah, like
I don't
you're
like people who call me a racist all the time. Like yes, so
yeah,
that reaction is really natural, and it's really dangerous to.
and I found myself, well, and thank goodness, my life experience has put me in touch with other people, right, of different nationalities. It's put me in touch with indigenous people and transgender people, and it giving me some perspective. But it can be very easy to go into that rabbit hole, when people are identifying against. And like, for instance, I have a friend who corrects me on my pronouns all the time. And you know what? It gets pretty annoying after a while. If someone keeps dictating your speech. Eventually, you're going to react against. They're acting against to the virtue signal, then I act against. It's almost like we both enter this relationship such that the emergent qualities manifest that are negative. But I think we're
Right.
getting away from,
No, no,
and
no,
then
no.
and then,
But I don't think we're getting away from it, right? Because like what is happening? They're trying to impose a system, right?
yeah,
And what is happening? Well, you're resisting the system that is imposed upon you, right? Now the
yeah,
question is, are you resisting because you're a bigot, or are you resisting because the system that they're imposing is not functioning?
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
It's
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 not
it's
functional.
all luxury, right? It's all baked air, and
The
that's
ironic the ironic thing is these people. See, I almost fell into it. I apologize.
no, like
But
there
there,
are people.
well, no, the ironic is there are people who are using their cell phones, who are driving their cars, that have all been created by systems that they say are completely, like those systems that oppress them. And I'm not going to deny that oppression never happened. I'm not going to deny that bad things have happened. But like those systems enable them the privilege to be able to criticize the system. So ironically, they are a product of the system, even in their acting against and even in their rebellion.
Right. Yeah. How, like, are you protesting gravity? Like, it's pretty annoying that I can fly. Like, what the heck? Right? Like, nobody's doing, well, not nobody, but people ain't doing that. Right. And so it's like, what, what things are you highlighting, and what gives you the justification to say, well, that this is not how it should? And if you highlight something all the time, right? It's like, I'm depressed, I can't get better. I'm depressed, I can't get better. I'm depressed, I can't get better. Are you gonna get better if that's in your head? No, because like you have a hermeneutics where you're looking for the thing that won't make you better, right? There's a and if you're smart, like someone who thinks he's smart, you can find many ways to say, well, like I did this and that wasn't good because and you can always find a trick, like you can always find a reason, like, oh, I'm not gonna do this because like whatever. And you can get really fancy with your reasons, but you got to stop, right? Like you either do it or you don't. And the reason you do it is because you want to. The reason you don't do it is because you don't want to. Like that's the only valid reason.
So if we were to recap, so what is a system? When people say the system, what do they mean? And ultimately, yeah, and what is the individual's ideal relationship to the systems that impede upon their lives, and enable their lives?
Yeah, well, my argument would be you go with it, right? Like when you pet a dog, right? You go with the hairs, not against them. If you go against the hairs, like the dog will get upset because it's not nice. So you can go against it, or you get a different dog if it's such a big deal. But like I've been having conversations with people over the years, right? It's like if you go to a hospital to get a checkup, right? You submit to the structure of the hospital, and they're gonna ask you stupid questions. They're gonna send you everywhere, and it's like it's gonna be a hassle, right? And you can be upset while doing it, or you can just accept that, okay, I decided to do this, and this is part of what I decided to do, and I should have known better before I went to do it.
So I don't know if I'm gonna have to think about the system thing more. I'd love to like engage with it again. So I think the system is a is both an emergent emanation phenomenon that has evolved over time, and then they're extremely complex, and they're not the product of one man or one group of people. No one has all that power, right? There's an emergent quality and there's an emanation quality, and the emanation quality, at if you follow that up, trying to track that down, will ultimately start at a point that is an ultimate mystery in a sense. But there is a danger in opposing the system, in that, like yeah, try to take apart a military helicopter and put it back together when you don't have the training, right? You know what I mean? And yeah, so where am I going with that? So what is the system?
Well, no, don't put it back together. Change the parts and make it work.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was good. So yeah, I still don't know that I could if I could succinctly say what a system is, but I can say what a system is not. And then when people say the system, I think that they're oftenly using that term in a reductionistic fashion, such that they don't understand that what they're dealing with is not one system. What they're dealing with is a network of multiple systems that are interrelated in such a level of concept. And the thing is, when you start pulling strings out of different nodes, you don't know which node is going to break your connection to other systems.
Right. And you you could take like a somewhat radical step and say, well, a system is a way of intelligibility that I impose upon the world, right? So you could say, right, like there's the system of oil distribution, right? It's like, well, in order to understand certain things about the world, I can look at the way that oil flows across the world, and now I can relate to that, right? Like if I'm an oil company, I can say, well, maybe I should send more oil to this place because it sounds like there's a lack of oil there, right? And I could probably sell it, right? So now, right now that system is going to feed back into itself, right? but it's an intelligibility, and then the question is, well, should I do that, right? Like, is that a good decision to base my decision upon the flow of oil? Like, maybe I should talk to people and let them tell me whether they want to buy oil. But maybe they don't know that they want to buy oil, and if I go there and I show them what oil can do, then they're like, holy shit, like I want some of that stuff, right? So it's not obvious, right? But what is obvious in relating to systems is they're a tool, right? So so you could say like they're spiritual things, so they're not actual things, right? Like they're a consequence of our belief and adherence to that belief. And so if I start treating the world as if there's this power narrative or this racism narrative, right? I'm gonna manifest the world in a specific way, right? Like I'm gonna establish certain relationships between people, and that's gonna have an effect upon the world. So I would say that use the systems, the understanding of systems that are gonna manifest the world around you that contribute to the good. Like, so know why you choose to look at a system and what your agency is in relation to that system.
And when you act against a system, like I think of systems are complex, they're interrelated, and no system is not connected to another system. So when you start saying that, oh, I'm going to overthrow the system, I'm going to change the system, you may be, yeah, you may, yeah, at a certain point the system can crash, right?
Yeah,
And then you think that you're trying to assert your freedom, but there are people that are going to oppose you that are going to say this system must be maintained, not just for me, but for you.
yeah. And if you are against the system so much, compete with it. Create a better one. Like, why are you trying to overthrow it? Like, just competition is better than, like, you want to wage war instead of just show that you're better. Because I know why you're not showing that you're better, because you're not. Like, that's as simple as it is. And if you are, like, prove it.
That's great. That's a great way to wrap it up. That was a mic drop right there, Manuel.
Well, thanks everybody for watching this impromptu dialogos with Corey. I hope to see you in the next episode.
Let's move back in the server. Let's go to the washroom for a sec.
Okay.